The radar screen painted a ghost. Colonel Pavel Kusov had been flying interceptors for 23 years, and he knew the difference between atmospheric interference and something real. At 42,000 feet over the Baltic, his MiG-31 Zaslan radar had just achieved what American strategists considered nearly impossible: a solid lock on a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. The tone in his helmet was steady, unwavering. His thumb rested on the weapons release. One button press, and the most expensive aircraft in the American arsenal would become burning wreckage in international waters. But Kusov didn't fire. Instead, he stared at his display, his mind racing through calculations that had nothing to do with intercept geometry or missile kinematics. The night had started as routine patrol work. Russian fighters sweeping the Baltic approaches, a show of force designed more for political messaging than actual combat. But intelligence had whispered something different into the operations center that evening. Satellite data showing unusual tanker activity over the North Sea, electronic signatures that appeared and vanished like smoke. Someone important was moving through their airspace, or close enough to matter. Kusov had been scrambled with two other aircraft, fanning out in a search pattern that covered hundreds of square miles of empty sky. His wingmen flew systematic grids while he trusted his instincts, pushing further west than doctrine suggested, following a hunch built on thousands of flight hours. The American bomber had been invisible for hours, exactly as designed. Its radar-absorbing coating reduced its signature to something smaller than a seabird, making it effectively undetectable to conventional air defense systems. The B-2 represented the pinnacle of stealth technology, billions of dollars and decades of research compressed into a flying wing that could penetrate the most sophisticated air defenses on Earth. But the MiG-31 wasn't conventional. Its massive radar, designed during the Cold War to hunt American bombers across the Arctic, had capabilities that surprised even modern analysts. More importantly, Kusov had developed instincts over 2 decades of interceptor work, knowing where to look, when to switch radar modes, how to catch the momentary flash of something that shouldn't exist. He'd found them by accident, really. A brief reflection, possibly from the weapons bay doors during a targeting sequence, enough for his computer to calculate a position, project a course. He'd turned hard, pushed his engines to military power, and closed the distance at supersonic speed. The twin Saturn engines screamed as he climbed, burning fuel at a prodigious rate. But fuel didn't matter now, only the intercept mattered. His radar locked on, and suddenly the ghost became solid. Target acquisition complete, weapons ready. All he needed to do was press the button. Now he had them. 2 American pilots in their flying wing, probably running through emergency procedures, wondering if this was the moment their stealth technology finally failed them. Kusov imagined their cockpit, the red warning lights, the threat receiver screaming its alert. He'd been on the other side of this equation before, had felt that spike of adrenaline when you realized someone had found you, that death was seconds away. It was the feeling that transcended nationality, pure primal fear that every combat pilot understood. Kusov knew the protocols. An American strategic bomber this close to Russian airspace, clearly on a mission profile rather than innocent transit, represented a legitimate threat. His rules of engagement were clear. If he determined hostile intent, if he believed Russian territory or forces were at risk, he was authorized to engage. The authorization didn't even require confirmation from command. Interceptor pilots operated with significant autonomy, trusted to make split-second decisions that could alter the course of international relations. But something made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the quality of the lock itself, not the hard, unambiguous return of a conventional aircraft, but something softer, more uncertain. The B-2 was still fighting him electronically, its systems trying to break the lock, spoof his missiles, convince his radar that nothing was really there. The Americans had good countermeasures, sophisticated electronic warfare systems that could confuse or deceive most missiles. But at this range, with this lock quality, Kusov's R-33 missiles would have an excellent probability of kill. The Americans knew it too. They were flying straight and level, not attempting evasion. Either they believed their stealth would hold, or they understood that defensive maneuvers would only confirm their position to every Russian fighter in the area. It was a calculated gamble, and Kusov held all the cards. Then his radio crackled with an encrypted burst transmission from command. New intelligence pushed to his cockpit display in real time. Kusov read it once, then again, his blood running cold. A military installation near Bryansk had just experienced what was being reported as a catastrophic power failure. Transformers exploding in a cascade that looked suspiciously like an electromagnetic pulse weapon. The timing was impossible to ignore. American bomber over the Baltic, mysterious explosions in western Russia. His radar station at the facility was offline, possibly destroyed. Initial casualty estimates were still coming in, but the night shift had been on duty when it happened. Kusov thought about his son, Alexei, 20 years old, studying military engineering at the academy in Bryansk, the academy that sat 200 meters from that radar installation. He'd spoken to his son just yesterday, excited about an upcoming examination, complaining about the food, asking when his father might get leave to visit. He'd promised to come soon, maybe bring his grandson to see the base, show him the fighters. They'd talked about Alexei's studies, about his hopes of becoming an aerospace engineer, perhaps even working on the next generation of Russian fighters. Kusov remembered the pride in his son's voice, the enthusiasm of youth not yet tempered by the harsh realities of military service. His thumb still rested on the weapons release. The American bomber was right there, completely vulnerable. He could fire, claim justified retaliation for an attack on Russian soil, start a chain of events that might lead anywhere. Escalation, crisis, possibly war. The Americans had struck first, had destroyed Russian military infrastructure, had killed Russian soldiers. By any measure, he would be justified. His commanders would praise him. He might receive a medal. The propaganda value alone would be immense. A Russian pilot shooting down America's most advanced bomber, proving that their vaunted stealth technology wasn't invincible. Or he could let them go. These two American pilots who had just struck at his country, who might have killed his son. The decision should have been simple. Duty demanded one course of action, but Kusov was a father before he was a fighter pilot, and the uncertainty about his son's fate paralyzed him more effectively than any electronic countermeasure. He switched frequencies, contacted his command center directly, requesting immediate status update on Bryansk Military Engineering Academy. He transmitted, his voice tight with controlled fear. The seconds waiting for a response felt like hours. Around him, the sky was beginning to lighten, dawn approaching over the Baltic, painting the clouds in shades of amber and rose. Below, the dark waters reflected the coming sunrise, oblivious to the drama playing out miles above. His MiG-31 flew on autopilot, while his entire world contracted to the radio speaker in his helmet. The response came back, Academy dormitory untouched. All cadets accounted for and safe. The explosion was contained to the transformer complex and radar facility itself. Kusov felt something release in his chest, a tension he hadn't fully acknowledged until it disappeared. His son was alive. The Americans had struck with precision, targeting the military installation while deliberately avoiding the academy. They could have destroyed everything. One missile with a larger warhead, a slightly different aim point. The academy would have been inside the blast radius. 200 young men, including his son, would have died in their sleep. But they hadn't. Someone in that B-2, some American pilot he would never meet, had made a choice. They'd adjusted their strike, accepted reduced effectiveness of their mission in order to spare those cadets. It was the kind of decision that got you court-martialed, that ended careers, that violated the cold logic of warfare. But it was also the kind of decision that separated humans from machines, that proved mercy could exist even in the machinery of modern combat. He looked at his radar display again. The lock was still solid, perhaps even stronger now as the B-2's countermeasures began to fail against his sustained illumination. The Americans probably knew they were caught, were waiting for the missile launch warning, preparing for the end. Kusov thought about the surgical precision of their strike, about the restraint it represented. He thought about his son, safe in his dormitory, waking up to news of an explosion he probably slept through. He thought about the American pilot who had made that choice, who had valued Russian lives enough to compromise their mission. Then he did something that would puzzle intelligence analysts on both sides for years afterwards. He shut down his targeting radar. The lock broke. On their displays, the American pilots would see him turning away, rejoining the search pattern as if he'd found nothing. Kusov keyed his radio to the encrypted command frequency, negative contact, atmospheric interference, continuing patrol.
The lie would be obvious to anyone reviewing the radar tapes, but plausible enough for the official record. In the strange calculus of modern conflict, where nations conducted warfare while maintaining diplomatic fiction, sometimes the official record was all that mattered. The truth that he deliberately released an American bomber that had just attacked Russian territory would remain between him and whatever gods watched over fighter pilots. As Kusov flew west, putting distance between himself and the American bomber, he considered what had just happened. An unofficial exchange between pilots, a moment of recognition that transcended national allegiance. One father acknowledging another's decision to spare innocent lives, responding with mercy rather than vengeance. It wouldn't change the strategic picture. The radar station was still destroyed, its sophisticated equipment reduced to molten slag. American operations over Eastern Europe would continue unimpeded. The balance of power hadn't shifted, but perhaps in some small way, it demonstrated that humanity could survive even in the machinery of modern warfare. Inside the B-2, Major Sarah Chen and Captain Marcus Williams watched the MiG-31 disappear from their displays with a mixture of relief and confusion. They'd been seconds from deploying countermeasures, from trying desperate evasion maneuvers that probably wouldn't have worked. The Russian pilot had them completely, could have fired at any moment. Williams had actually reached for the chaff dispenser, ready to flood the sky with radar-reflective material in the last desperate attempt at survival. Instead, the Foxhound had simply turned away, its radar going silent, its threat disappearing from their screens as if it had never existed. Chen thought about the decision she'd made an hour earlier, adjusting the targeting point to spare the academy dormitory, disobeying direct orders because killing 200 sleeping cadets felt like crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She'd expected consequences, possibly court-martial, certainly the end of her combat career. The Air Force didn't look kindly on pilots who modified targeting solutions based on personal conscience. But she hadn't expected this, a Russian pilot with a clear shot choosing not to take it, demonstrating a mercy that mirrored her own decision. Why? Williams voiced the question that would haunt intelligence briefings for months. He had us dead to rights. Why let us go? Chen had no answer that would satisfy military analysts or intelligence officers. Perhaps the Russian pilot had experienced a radar malfunction at the critical moment. Unlikely, but possible. Perhaps he decided the political complications of shooting down an American bomber in international waters weren't worth it. Plausible, but inconsistent with Russian doctrine. Or perhaps, and this was what Chen chose to believe, he'd understood what they'd done, recognized the restraint they'd shown, and responded in kind. Pilot to pilot, human to human, across the ideological divide that separated their nations. They flew on toward England, toward debriefings and consequences and official fictions. Behind them, the sun rose fully over the Baltic, illuminating a world that had come within seconds of a very different dawn. Two pilots had held each other's lives in their hands and chosen mercy over duty, humanity over protocol. The missions would continue, the strategic competition would persist, but in that moment above the Baltic, something else had emerged. A recognition that the people flying these missions were more than just weapons platforms, more than just extensions of national will. The official Russian report would blame substandard transformers and cascading failures, a plausible cover story that both sides could accept without acknowledgement. NATO would continue its operations, and the geopolitical chess game would proceed as if nothing had happened. But in classified briefings on both sides, analysts would study that encounter endlessly, trying to understand the decisions made in those crucial seconds. The Americans would wonder why their most advanced bomber had been allowed to escape. The Russians would question why their interceptor pilot had reported negative contact when radar logs clearly showed otherwise. Years later, Chen would keep a photograph on her desk at the Air Force Weapons School where she taught young pilots about the ethics of combat. The photo showed Russian military cadets in formation outside their dormitory, taken the morning after a night they never knew they'd survived. She used it to illustrate a lesson about the weight of command, about the choices that defined you more than the orders you followed. Her students would listen with the confidence of youth, believing they would always follow protocol, always execute orders perfectly. She never told them how wrong they were, how the hardest decisions came not from the enemy, but from your own conscience. And somewhere in Moscow, Colonel Pavel Kusov would occasionally raise a glass toward the west, a private toast to an unknown American pilot who had spared his son and whom he had spared in return. In the cold mathematics of modern warfare, these moments of grace were rare, but they existed. Small confirmations that even at supersonic speeds and 40,000 feet, humanity could still assert itself against the machinery of conflict. He never spoke of it to his colleagues, never filed an amended report, but when he looked at his son during family gatherings, watching Alexei laugh and dream about his future, Kusov knew he'd made the right choice. Some decisions transcended duty, transcended nationalism, transcended everything except the fundamental recognition of shared humanity.